Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, and I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, if it's your first time tuning in or your 120th time, since we've been doing this show for a little while, the one thing we start off with is that hope is not a sales strategy. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, Sean, I don't have hope in what I do. I'm at the top of my career. I'm in the top 1%. I'm in the president's club. Matter of fact, I am the president. I sold so much stuff, they just made me the executive of the whole company. Maybe that's your case. But I guarantee that hope is entering into the picture in more ways than you might realize. And I know this because I was able to embed with some of the highest performing teams in the military on the planet. Think Marine Corps Force Recon, think Navy SEALs, think Green Berets. These folks are at the top of their game when it comes to combat operations, and they still, every single mission, took the time to look at where hope was entering the picture. So if these men and women can do it, I think that we as salespeople can do it too. Because just like them, we're not focused on just selling stuff. We're not just focused on pounding a mission through. We're focused on service. In order to sell more, we have to think about what does it take to serve more. And so here at Bulletproof Selling, for more than 2 years now, we've been doing that with guests on this show, being able to bring in Hall of Fame speakers, best-selling authors, international sales leaders, people that are from a variety of different countries around the world, all focused on how to remove hope from how we sell. And of every single one of these shows, my commitment to you as the listener is that we will create a sales system with our guest so that you can use it. You can take what you hear and bring it home. No matter the size of your team or the size of your goals, you'll be able to remove hope from how you sell. Now, if we think of a sales cycle beginning to end, we've got sourcing leads at one end, or maybe we've been handed them from our marketing team, all the way through the sales cycle, down into negotiation, down into closing, down into generating referrals from hopefully, or not so hopefully, a very happy customer. Because I know we're building in ways to make sure that we're fulfilling the commitments we make as salespeople. So again, even after someone's a customer, we shouldn't hope they take advantage of our product or service. We need to make sure that they're getting the value, because that's how referrals are generated. Through that entire sales process, there's one element that falls down, because if you are a high performing salesperson, like I know a lot of our listeners are, you've got that CRM, you've got your pipeline set up, you've got a high performing machine that can assist you in making sales. But the one thing that will cause a high performing machine to fail is if it doesn't have fuel, if it doesn't have that energy source that's going to make sure that it has what it needs to continue functioning. Today, we're going to talk about that energy source. And as really gets me excited every single show we get to do with one of these particular types of people, we get to bring on a military veteran. This guy, as a matter of fact, another U.S. Marine. So what that means is we're both going to have our non-toxic crayons that we can chew on. We're going to use very small words, but that's the stereotype of Marines. I know that our guest today and myself, we might not fit that average stereotype, but we definitely believe that the military gave us some things that allowed us to sell better, because it really taught us the importance of process, taught us the importance of continuous improvement. That's how we stayed alive on battlefields, and it's how we continue to serve in sales. So here with us today to talk about the importance and the process that is really necessary with making sure you've got a great fuel source for your pipeline, I'm proud to welcome on a fellow Marine, Mr. Skip Vish. Skip, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Hey, good morning, Sean. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time and opportunity to talk through this with you.
That's my pleasure, sir. My pleasure. So, folks that weren't able to read your bio, you got to do some cool stuff in the Marine Corps, helicopter pilot, among other things. So, talk to us a little bit about your military experience, and then I'd love to hear about what that gave you that assisted you in becoming a sales leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one minor course correction.
Oh, sorry, bud.
I don't have love for the Marines, but I was a U.S. Army helicopter pilot.
So, Army helicopter pilot. Okay, yeah, but nothing but love for the Marines. All right, well, okay. If you're a helicopter pilot, then we need to pivot this conversation, because I gotta be honest with you. Every time I was ever on a Chinook or any other type of helicopter airframe, it scared the pants off me. I mean, almost right off of me. Those things do not fly as smooth as you see in the movies. So, talk to me a little bit about that.
It's 10,000 pieces moving in unison and harmony. That's kind of what it's all made up of. But it was a great honor for me to serve. I love the mission. I was in 101st Airborne at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Great mission, great legacy of that unit. And the majority of my flying time was at night under night vision goggles, which which
Whoa.
created a little bit of increased anxiety. I happened to be a pilot in command, so was and also the flight operations officer. So I was right in the thick of things as we were planning missions and preparing for any rapid deployment needs around the globe. So as I said, an incredible honor for me to be a part of that. It definitely set the foundation for me as I made the decision to exit the military and move out into the business world.
So talk to me about the things that you learned in the military that assisted you in sales, because so many people don't believe the military does a great job of preparing us for civilian life at all. And I'll grant you, there's a whole host of things that we do have to change when we leave the military in order to be successful as civilians, whether personally or professionally. But yet, so many veterans that I'm talking to now ended up in sales, and they say, Sean, the military gave me all of the foundational tools for success. So talk to me about what you learned from the military that have really propelled you forward in the world of sales.
Well, I mean, it's a great question because there's so much to talk through in that space. One is discipline. Without discipline, the formations of the military, whether it's the tactical training or the administrative activities, it falls apart without the discipline. And then followed closely behind that is process. Everything has a process, and while it may seem mundane and redundant, there is a reason for it. If you understand the method behind the madness, then it makes sense. Or some say the why behind the what. And then to further that, as a helicopter pilot, process, discipline, mechanics, all are how you stay alive. Because if you're not a good 6 steps ahead of the helicopter and anticipating what needs to come next after the next 5 things, is that aircraft will flat out kill you. And it's not just you have to worry about. It's the soldiers that are on board, the equipment that you're carrying. You're responsible for a lot when you're actually up in the air. So you have to be on your game all the time. And I had a recruiter, a civilian recruiter, talk to me about the military officers who are exiting the service, why they have an opportunity to excel and really do well. And it's because in our world, 85 or 90%, or that's good enough, is not a good answer, because that means 10 to 15% of your soldiers don't make it back. And
that's right.
That's a good answer, right? So we always look to get to 99.9% to bring everybody back at any cost. And so that translates into the world that we're in of business. Is that's good enough at 85 or 90% is not good enough. And so we have that drive to go that extra mile.
That's amazing. So we talked a little bit about then your career. You're leading a big sales team now, really managing people with process-driven systems. So I love that, because we talked to a lot of sales leaders just in the work I do and on this podcast, and so many of them struggle to adapt systems into what they're doing to get salespeople bought into it. So I'd be curious then to find out from you, how do you get your salespeople, which unless they've been in the military or they just happen to have an engineering mindset, usually people are not process-driven when they're handed all of the things that they need to be successful. They have to learn process the hard way. And in sales, that means a lot of lost deals to learn what not to do. So I'd be curious to know how you found getting people to adopt process and systems has gone for you. What lessons learned do you have for any sales leaders that are listening now?
Yeah, I think part of it is it's a process, not an event. Coaching and learning is an ongoing activity. You can't ever just kind of, clap your hands and go, that's it, I'm done. The process is set, let's go. It's continuous improvement. It's moving forward. It's helping those who join the team or are on the team understand your processes, why they're in place, and what the benefits are. And a lot of times, as you work with the salespeople, they have their own processes and methodologies. And so it's the blending, it's the integration of that. I think each salesperson is a mix of all the previous sales roles and sales leaders that they've had. And it kind of mixes together to form their own persona. It's the fabric of who they are as a salesperson, and your ability to convey the value behind the process by showing anecdotally how it has succeeded, and also being willing to understand, when you lose, what did you learn, and how can you improve on that process so that you don't repeat the same mistakes. Nobody's ever going to get fired for losing a deal once. I think that if you lose the deal again for the same reason, then there's a problem and you have to address it. But I think, for me, I think that I hate losing more than I love winning, if that makes sense. And so we will do what we can to build that structure so that we have the highest probability of success. Hope is not a strategy, but hope shows itself in all the phraseology in today.
It sure does. Yeah, we've heard from one of our guests just recently that a lot of salespeople are out there smoking hopium, thinking that this is just magically going to work out for them. And
Yeah,
you mentioned something that is so valuable. We'll probably have to have you back on the show to talk about it, which is the idea of assessing a lost deal, to look at why did we lose it, and more importantly, how do we make sure that not only me but my entire team never
right.
loses the deal for that reason again.
No
Because if you
doubt.
can do that on every lost deal, your performance just skyrockets, and I've seen it happen on the teams I've worked with. So that's definitely a topic we'll have to talk about. But I know
Yeah.
you and I were chatting before the show about a couple of areas that you had seen hope enter the picture for the teams that you'd worked with, and we talked about the value of having a pipeline. But as I mentioned in the show intro, without the fuel for that pipeline, things just don't happen. You could have the highest performing, Lamborghini in your driveway. You don't have the right type of fuel or fuel at all, that thing's not leaving anywhere. It's not going on the road. So I'd be curious to know, where do you see sales teams that you've worked with relying on hope in the early part of their sales process?
Yeah, it happens, right? There's the well, we hope they're going to meet with us, or we hope that they're going to get the budget, and I think that what you said is so very true, and it takes some effort and energy to get the hope driven out of the process, and in order to fuel that engine, you have to have leads, and you have to make sure that those leads are actionable, because in the absence of those two things, it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you have sitting in the driveway, it's not going anywhere. It doesn't matter how good your salesperson is. If you don't have those leads, and if those leads are not actionable, then it doesn't matter what your quote is, because you're not going to hit it.
I 100% agree with you on that. Something that's going to come up for a lot of sales leaders, though, is they may be thinking to themselves, well, our marketing team is supposed to be doing a good job of making sure these are quality leads. And as a sales leader, I've taught my people what to do with these leads when they come in, but they're still not performing at the level I want them to. So how do I know as a sales leader that one of these two problems is happening? Either the leads are not quality, or for some reason the actionable piece is dropping off. Well, what are
For
the
sure.
early indicators of failure there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the actual piece of it is where we come in as leaders, right? It's to ensure that there's pipeline progression, and what does it take to progress from one stage to the next, and ensuring that that's documented through whatever CRM you might have. I think that fundamentally and further upstream is the actual creation of the leads themselves. How do you get those leads generated? Where does that come from? And I think that there's three fundamental areas that leads are sourced from. One is self-sourced, and we'll circle back to these in a minute if there's time, but self-sourced, and then there's a sales development or inside sales or business development rep. It's those three-letter acronyms are used interchangeably. So you have the SDR sourced leads, and then you have marketing source, which is the marketing-driven engine that's inbound and outbound activities and trade shows and things like that. But I think without those three legs of the stool operating in equilibrium, what happens if you have a three-legged stool that doesn't have equal length of legs, right? You're going to tip
Fall over.
right. So you have to have all of those in equilibrium building to that pipeline. And your pipeline, as a salesperson, it is a requirement, 3 to 5x of your quota. So if you have $1 million quota, you better have a pipeline that's $3 to $5 million to give you the highest probability of success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've got then the idea that this equation could fail either on the lead source side or on the action side. And
Right.
a lot of sales leaders that I talk to, they are responsible for making sure their salespeople manage the self-service leads. They might be managing inside sales. Some of them are doing marketing, but I mean, ultimately, as a leader, it's that whole principle of extreme ownership that I know you and I learned in the military. It
Right.
does fall back to us. And if there's a
Yes.
problem on the lead quality side, I could point the finger at marketing. I could point the finger at my SDRs, but really, I'm the one that's responsible for making sure that this pipeline is growing. So I want to make
Right.
sure that we're centering this in on what you and I very well know does come back to the leader, as the buck stops here. So let's create a system around this, because it's not something that we've gotten to address yet on Bulletproof Selling. The idea of making sure that I've got the highest quality fuel at the front of my pipeline. So for all of the systems that you had to learn as a helicopter pilot, most of them came because someone almost died or did die in the process of creating that system.
Right.
They got back from a flight or from a combat mission. They did their debrief and they said, if we don't make sure that we maintain this part of the engine, it just about blew out on me. So we
Right.
need to make sure that our mechanics are taking care of this from now on. And from that point on, every time that airplane got serviced or the aircraft got serviced, that thing got serviced as well. So
Sure.
we learn things the hard way, but in sales, thankfully, life and death are not usually on the line for us to make a deal or not. But every system that we place does the same thing it did for us in the military. It removes a little more hope. So if we're trimming hope away, we use this acronym TRIM here at Bulletproof Selling to help us create these very simple sales systems that we can have a trigger element for, make sure it's repeatable, improvable, and measurable. That's the whole acronym. So let's start with the T on this, Skip, the trigger element. I'm in sales, or I'm a sales leader. I've got a problem with either lead quality or actionable steps with my leads. Once they enter the pipeline, I need to take care of this area. When do I need to trigger this system? Is it when I'm getting ready to do outreach? Is it when I'm, talking with my SDRs and my marketing team about the type of leads? Or is it way before that when I'm even considering like what my ideal client profile might be? Where do you reckon we trigger a system that helps us take care of lead quality and actionable steps?
I think, wow, that is a deep question. We could go for a couple hours on this, but I do think as you start to talk about how do we move upstream to the most, important aspect of getting started, what is that singular bolt that goes into place, that anchors everything into place? And I think that you mentioned the ideal customer profile, the ICP. If that's not identified, then you're chasing the wrong audience. So knowing is, if you think back to anybody that's had a marketing class, marketing 101 is know thy audience. And so you have to know the solution you're providing and is it a good fit for the audience that you're targeting? Because if it's not, you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. That's the first thing. And then I think it's the discovery process. It's understanding what do they have a need or do they have a want? And is it critical path to their success? Is there some type of a mandate? So it's all of the discovery discussions that take place that help you find out, are you talking to the right person? Are you talking to the right customer or prospect? And where do you go from there? And if all of those, it's a decision tree. It's a yes-no decision tree. And as you work your way through the yes-no, you come out to the bottom that says engage or, not a good prospect, move on to the next one.
Awesome. So we've got that trigger element handled, which does happen before we're ever in the middle of conducting outreach. So now that I've hopefully got good quality leads and, hope gets removed with every new piece of the system that you just mentioned. We've got our ideal client profile identified. We've looked at the wants and needs of this segment of the market to make sure that not only does my product or service fix that, does it fulfill that want or that need, but can I bridge the gap between them understanding it and my believing in it? Because that's always the gap that we get to cross as salespeople, help our prospect cross. So now we're into the R in this method, which is making this thing repeatable. So I'd like to focus this on those actionable items because you mentioned leads and actionable. So if I'm making this actionable, then as a salesperson, I need to know when I open up my CRM and I've got that lead that dropped in there or that I entered in the day before, I need to know what the first couple of steps I should take on this to begin that pipeline movement process. What's the first part of the engine this needs to get dropped in and what needs to happen to that lead to make sure that I'm progressing it through the engine, through the pipeline? So what are the maybe 3 to 5 things that you'd recommend any sales leader take a look at when they're thinking of what are the actionable things that need to happen when a lead first enters the pipeline?
Yeah, and I think as a sales leader, your responsibility is to kind of check and double check what's happening so that the information that's in there is accurate and it remains actionable and it progresses. I think that one of the flags of warning is if you look at a lead and it's had no activity for the last 4 to 6 weeks, that's a problem. So the actionable items, what is it that has to happen to begin the progression through the pipeline has to be documented. And I think it all goes back to documentation and the salesperson having tools that help them document that. Nobody expects a salesperson to have photographic memory and be able to capture everything. So there are tools to help. We have Course that we use, Course AI. It records, it collects action items. It's a phenomenal tool that also allows for coaching and feedback. So I think that helping the salesperson understand what is the objective, right? I mean, in the military, we have 5-paragraph op orders, right? And one of those is the objective, right? So what's the mission? What's the objective? And in that objective is obviously you're trying to get to a point where you get a sales order. And what are the steps that get you to that? And that should be documented. And that all comes to light and becomes visible through your calls with the customer and discovery. Quite often a customer will want to rush into, just give me your quote, just tell me the price. Mm-hmm. But you could be pricing out a mousetrap and they're looking for a bear trap. I mean, it's just there's a lot of seeking first to understand, right, before you try to be understood. I'm a huge Cubby fan as well. And I think that the more you can extrapolate from the customer on what it is they're trying to get to and what is the problem that they're trying to fix so that you can present the correct solution. And again, it's actionable because you're seeking information that may then lead to a demo, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean you launch out of the gate with the demo. That should probably be your second meeting at the earliest, maybe the third. But I certainly don't think it should be the first unless the customer insists upon it. And that customer may, because if they're a previous customer at a different company and they know you as a salesperson and they know the product, they're like, hey, I just want to show this to some other people. So there are some circumstances that take you outside of the norm, but the scalability and repeatability of the process to progress that lead through the pipeline has to be installed, and it has to be adhered to, I think, with some flexibility based off of some of the things I just talked about.
So I've got a couple of great steps then, ensuring that my existing leads have had contact, because I know a lot of problem salespeople have across the companies I've been able to work with is they're held to enter new leads into their pipeline, whatever amount it is a week, 10 or 20 a week. And pretty soon they've got a 400 person thick pipeline, but a lot of those leads, maybe 60, 70% of them haven't had contact in 6 months.
Right.
So that's a problem. If these folks were qualified to begin with, they're going to lose track of you. You're going to lose track of them. So it's to make sure these folks are in contact, to ensure that there's a method to document what you learn. Most CRMs are built for this, but there's a lot of great tools that you mentioned that can do it in tandem with that. And then to ensure your salespeople do have that objective. So I want to focus on that for just a second for the remaining steps in this repeatable process. Because I want to know, as a salesperson, I've got this lead in, I need to kind of scrub it to make sure that it does have all the things that I need to conduct a great outreach call. Because if all I'm calling to do is to find out, well, who's responsible for buying XYZ at your company? When was the last time that you think you might have a need for that? And when do you think you'll have a need for that in the future? Like, that's just a crappy sales call. I want to be a little bit more educated. So what are the things that you recommend as best practices that one of your salespeople do with one of those leads to make sure that the first time they do have that conversation, they're showing up a little more educated than the average bear?
Right. I think salespeople, there is something called the art of the storytelling. And good salespeople, great salespeople, are amazing storytellers. And they're the people that have 3 bullet points on a PowerPoint slide, and they talk about the bullet points, not to them, right? If somebody's going to read you a PowerPoint slide, then they can just email it to you. And I think that through the art of storytelling, you extract the information from the customer without it seeming like, an inquisition. And I think through that storytell and open-ended questions, you find out, yeah, this is a mandate coming down from the CEO. This was in our analyst report. And I think some of the requirements for the seller is to do your homework. Look at the customer's website before you go to a meeting with them. Look at their last analyst call. Look at their letter to shareholders. There is so much information that you can garner from data that's publicly known, and you will have done your homework and you are informed when you're talking to the customer. It's pretty incredible. I had a meeting with an aerospace and defense contractor that shall remain nameless, but I had done some homework, and they were building a piece of very, very large equipment, and it turned out that they had no ammunition for that equipment. So they had this beautiful piece of equipment, but they couldn't get ammunition. And when I walked in, before I ever started helping to do some discovery and find some things out, I asked them, hey, it sounds like it's a pretty rough week learning that you guys don't have ammunition for this piece of equipment. Have you figured out a solution? What's the workaround there? And the person that was there was only supposed to stay for 10 minutes. They ended up staying for 45 minutes because I asked them about their work environment and their issues that they were trying to solve, not, hey, how much software can I sell you? So I think that there is that art of working things into the discussion that seem very true and sincere and not on the surface. So I think that that's an important piece of it. And then once you get there, it's also having the discussion through, how can I help you solve your problem? And that's not features. Like, sometimes salespeople get into this trap of rattling off a feature set. And sometimes the people that are in the room don't care about the features. They want to know what are the benefits. And that's a really different conversation. The sales team has to be ready to talk about the benefits to the customer, what they could derive from the product, and not the features. Because
I've noticed, Skip, that a lot of the customers that I've come across and that I have to customize my benefits to them. They might have, general overarching categories of benefits, but I need to learn what this person's specifically looking for as an end state. And if I can match what I sell with that, magic happens, right? Magic happens. So those are great repeatable steps. I want to move into the iron trim, which is making this thing improvable. Now, this is something I know that you and I are very passionate about, making sure that things get better over time. Obviously, the airframes that we were flying in Vietnam, they improved a bit. Between that point and the time when you were picking up the stick and flying those airframes, if we don't get better, then we will be left behind.
Right.
Systems are the same way. So I'd
For
like
sure.
to know, if I'm a sales leader and I'm looking at putting together a great kind of early entry system for all the leads that are coming through, to make sure they're identified right, make sure they've got next steps on them, that we're researching, that we're taking action, telling great stories. What am I going to do to improve this? Is it something that I make an appointment for on my calendar? Do I talk to my sales team about it? Am I looking at what our conversion rate is for conversations or initial meetings? How am I going to make sure that I'm taking what is a great system already and make sure it keeps up with any changes that happen in the environment?
Yeah, it's a multiple checklist of things. And you talked about what happens when you lose, and we call it post-mortem, right? We did post-mortems after we finished flying, right? What went well, what didn't go well, and the focus is more on what didn't go well, not necessarily about patting yourselves on the back for a great mission. And the same is true when you lose a significant deal. Is you have to do that post-mortem, and you have to do it so that everybody learns from it, so that the mistakes are not repeated with a different salesperson or a different customer. And I think that part of that activity takes place in a group setting as a team, where you can talk about things, so that, and I think it's also very important for the account executive to share information versus just the sales leader doing all the talking, because the source of truth coming from a peer could also carry more weight, be more viable, more real, and less threatening to have that conversation, which usually spawns offline conversations to go a little bit deeper on what that meant, what they did, what they didn't do. And it's called a sales process for a reason. It's not called a sales event, because it is a process, right? And it's a continuous improvement. And I think you nailed it. If you don't improve along the way, you will get left behind.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's called a sales process, not an event. Important enough for me to make a note on, because that's valuable stuff. So if we're focusing then on our lost deals, and when you postmortem a lost deal, and this is a process I get to walk sales teams through all the time, you look at where in the sales cycle could we have improved what we did, what we can take ownership of, so that we never lose a deal for that reason again. Right. So where you might discover is that, well, we discovered only 4 weeks in and 8 conversations later that this, what we thought was a decision maker, was not actually a decision maker.
God, that happens all the time.
It happens all the time. So what we need then to look at is, all right, well, that definitely affects our early entry process that we heard Sean and Skip talk about on Bulletproof Selling. So how can we go back to the beginning and make sure that the leads that are entering the pipeline from this point forward are more qualified, so we don't run into that problem again? Because I can't make somebody have a different job title if they're a prospect, but I can control how many of those certain types of job titles I'm reaching out to, and making sure that they're all VPs of whatever, or they're all, technical buyers of whatever job title. So great way to improve. The final piece on this TRIM acronym is M, which is measure. I want to make sure that this system, which is going to take maybe a little bit more time at the outset than I may be doing now, where all I do is I get a lead and I start banging the phone. It's going to take a little more time to do this system. I need to justify it. But what am I going to measure, Skip? What are the early indicators on the leading indicator side of the sale, the stuff that's happening in the pipeline that I can control? Because obviously we can measure closed deals, and that's great. But I find most salespeople are a little happier if they can control something. What are the things I can control as a salesperson to make sure that I'm measuring the success of this along the way?
Right. No, I think that it's great to talk about what has to be measured. One of the things is, if we get back to what is actionable, right? If it's actionable, it's measurable. And that progression through the pipeline and those dates that you have established as, I'm going to go from early stage to upside, and this is what I need to do to make that happen. I need to know either how much they're going to spend or when they're going to spend it. And that allows you to have an action item to get it from early stage to upside. And then upside to commit is, I know when and how much they're going to buy, and I know, and then I can move into a commit stage. And I think it's very succinct. It's very short to get from early stage to commit. We talk about the number of words, but it could be very long based on the sales cycle time. So once you get within each of those stages, you have to have a conversation with, maybe it's your solutions coordinator, maybe it's your leader, to get executive to executive alignment, so that if a deal gets stuck, you're not having an introductory call when the deal is stuck. You have already made that introduction. I think that a single point of contact is equal to a single point of failure. And I think that if you don't have multiple contacts that you can escalate to, if that person quits and that's the only point of contact you had, you are in really big trouble.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a measure. It's a question that gets asked is, who else do you know? Who else are you working with besides person A? Is there an executive sponsor that we can meet with? So there's a lot of questions that kind of inject that process into the process itself of the sales pipeline. So I think that becomes the measurable is, have you verified, ensuring that the sales team, the salespeople do not get happy ears, that they get to a point where they're hearing yes, and it's I understand, not I agree, right? There's a very, very succinct difference there. And then I think there's also a worry at the end when you get to commit that somebody gets, I don't know if you're a golfer, but there's those gimme putts that are like 6 inches or 8 inches, or some people maybe 6 feet from the cup, and that's good. Or it's a football euphemism when you're at the 5-yard line and it's kind of a walk-in touchdown. Well, the gimme factor for salespeople is the customer begins to ask for more and more when you're like that close to the goal line or that close to the cup. And salespeople tend to want to give it, okay, I'll throw that in, we'll get that done. And if you don't exercise the give get, and you don't understand that that's their job is to ask for as much as they can on the customer side until you say, this is my best and final, or let me recap for you what I have conceded in this process, and help them remember that my concessions have been 6 or 7 items, haven't really got much back. I need a marketing announcement, a press release, a referral site, whatever it happens to be, right? So that there is a give get in that space. Those are all measurable. Those are all things that you can ask very simple questions during one-on-one meetings or in team meetings when you're talking through the pipeline and the progression to getting the deal closed.
So the complete sales system on what to do with that lead from the early entry point in your pipeline to make sure that it's as set up for success as we can make it. And if we take the time to map this out as salespeople, think of the power that could have across your entire pipeline, because you may not have a lot of leads coming in that are built to this level now, but if you make a commitment as a salesperson that every single lead that comes in, we're going to have this minimum standard met, pretty soon, when those old leads cycle out or they go dead and you've only got brand new leads in your pipeline that have been used this process, it's going to get so much easier for you. You're going to enjoy yourself so much more, because instead of having to hope you remember all of this stuff, hope that the buyer gives you that magical piece of information, you're going to know to ask for it. You're going to know how to ask for it in a way that serves them. You're telling a story, getting into their shoes, seeing things from their perspective. So, Skip, amazing early stage sales system for us. I want to make sure people have time to get out there and use it. So how do we get in contact with you if we have more questions? I know you're active on LinkedIn, but where can we go to get deeper in your world?
Yeah, I think you hit it. This is an amazing topic. There's 3 or 4 levels deep of all of these subjects that we could talk about for several hours. The sales cycle and sales process is deep. People can hit me up on LinkedIn. If you just put my name in the search bar for LinkedIn, it'll come up. Feel free to reach out to me via the message system there. If you would like to have some specific questions answered, happy to be connect with you via email. svish@uplandsoftware.com is my email address. Pretty much on email, text, Teams, 24/7. So, I will definitely respond to specific questions. If you'd like to have a conversation, if you're interested in some coaching, happy to do that. One of the things I loved about, being in the military and the sales leadership roles that I'm in now is the opportunity to coach and leave behind an impact with people, so that when they're doing sales 10 years from now, they remember this conversation.
All the great stuff. Sorry about that. Thanks, Skip, so much for all the great stuff you're doing for the sales community here. And for us at Bulletproof Selling, if you're catching this on the live stream, make sure that you are over there on YouTube, subscribing to that Bulletproof Selling channel. If you're listening to us on a podcast, best thing you can do for us, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a review so salespeople know that hope doesn't have to be part of their sales strategy anymore. Skip, thanks so much for giving back to the sales community with that giving spirit that I know you had a little bit before the military, but the military definitely helped you with, that now other sales teams get to grow from your wisdom. So let's get out there, sir. Let's make selling bulletproof.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.